Yeah.
To Lilly's Viking adventure. This is part 2 of our deep dive into the life of Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, one of the most extraordinary rulers in Anglo-Saxon history. In this episode, we'll explore her rise to power, her strategic marriage, and the challenges she faced as a young noblewoman in a world dominated by war and political intrigue. We'll also look at how she began to show the leadership skills that would define her legacy. If you haven't watched part 1, be sure to check it out to learn about her family and the events that shaped her early years. And don't forget to check the description for links to our Etsy shop, Viking Adventure Gifts, where you'll find Viking-inspired treasures and other unique gifts for history lovers. Sources for today's video are also listed in the description. Now, let's step back in time and uncover the next chapter in Æthelflæd's incredible journey. Life as a young princess in the Middle Ages as a royal daughter in 9th century Anglo-Saxon England, Æthelflæd would have been raised in a courtly environment, surrounded by nobles, warriors, and scholars. Life for a princess in this period was not one of idle luxury, but of duty and preparation. Unlike later medieval queens who lived in grand castles, Æthelflæd's world was one of wooden halls, fortified burhs, towns, and constant vigilance against Viking threats. She would have grown up in a politically charged atmosphere, witnessing firsthand the struggles of her father, Alfred the Great, against the Vikings. Her childhood would have been spent in places like Winchester, the royal heart of Wessex, and Athelney, where Alfred took refuge during the Viking incursions. It is likely she moved frequently between royal estates, as was common for noble families at the time. Æthelflæd's education and training. As the daughter of Alfred, a king known for his love of learning, Æthelflæd would have received a strong education, likely more extensive than that of most women of her time. Alfred himself emphasized education as a means of strengthening the kingdom, famously lamenting, "So completely had learning decayed among the English people that very few could understand anything of their own written land." Preface to Gregory's Pastoral Care. Given this, Æthelflæd was likely taught literacy in Old English and possibly Latin, as her father promoted the translation of Latin texts into the vernacular. She would have studied history and law, learning the customs of Wessex and Mercia, as well as the history of her people's struggles against the Vikings. Religious instruction would have played a central role in her education, ensuring she understood the Bible and the teachings of early Christian scholars. Political strategy and diplomacy were crucial skills for a woman of her standing, as she would later be expected to govern, negotiate alliances, and lead her people. While it is unlikely that she trained in combat, she would have been well aware of battle tactics, siege warfare, and the defense of fortified towns, growing up in a world where war was ever present. Clothing of a young Æthelflæd, Anglo-Saxon noblewomen wore long linen underdresses covered by a woolen overdress or tunic, often belted at the waist. High-status women like Æthelflæd would have worn garments dyed in rich colors, such as deep reds and blues, often decorated with intricate embroidery. A veil or headdress would have been common, particularly as she reached maturity. For a princess, clothing was a mark of status, and she may have worn brooches, gold embroidery, and tablet-woven braids to signify her royal lineage. The Staffordshire hoard, a collection of Anglo-Saxon treasure, gives insight into the elaborate gold and garnet jewelry worn by the elite. Shoes were made of soft leather and a warm, woolen cloak fastened with a brooch would have been essential for travel, while silk was rare and imported from the Byzantine Empire. It may have been available to her for ceremonial occasions. Descriptions of Æthelflæd as a child, unfortunately. No contemporary descriptions of Æthelflæd's childhood appearance exist. Unlike later medieval queens, Anglo-Saxon women were rarely described in terms of their physical beauty. However, given that she was of noble birth, she was likely fair-skinned, with long braided hair, possibly resembling her father or her brother, Edward the Elder. There are also no detailed descriptions of her temperament as a child, but considering her later reputation as a strong-willed and strategic leader, it is likely that she exhibited intelligence, resilience, and a sense of duty from a young age. Her upbringing in the court of Alfred the Great would have instilled in her a deep understanding of governance and military affairs. Important events in her childhood, growing up, Æthelflæd would have been aware of several defining moments in Anglo-Saxon history. In 865, the arrival of the great heathen army changed the course of English history, as the Viking invasion force began a campaign of conquest, taking over much of England and causing widespread destruction. By the time she was 6 years old in 871, her father Alfred ascended the throne after the death of his brother Æthelred, inheriting a kingdom on the brink of collapse. One of the most dramatic events of her childhood occurred in 878, when the Vikings launched a surprise winter assault, forcing Alfred into exile in the marshes of Athelney. The young Æthelflæd would have been aware of the uncertainties surrounding her family's fate during this time. However, later that same year, Alfred's victory at the Battle of Edington turned the tide, resulting in the Treaty of Wedmore and the temporary peace that followed. As she grew older, Æthelflæd would have witnessed the division of England into Anglo-Saxon and Viking-controlled territories in 886, when Alfred formally recognized the Danelaw. This division meant that while Wessex and parts of Mercia remained under Anglo-Saxon rule, the north and east of England were dominated by Norse warlords. Meanwhile, her mother's homeland, Mercia, was struggling under Viking control. The Mercian king, Ceolwulf, ruled under Viking influence, a situation that likely shaped Æthelflæd's growing sense of duty to reclaim her mother's land and resist the Norse invaders. Although we lack direct descriptions of Æthelflæd's childhood, we can infer that she grew up in a courtly environment of learning, strategy, and war. She was raised with a strong sense of duty, influenced by her father's wisdom and her mother's noble Mercian heritage. The Viking invasions and her family's response to them would have left a lasting impression, shaping her into the fierce and capable leader she would later become. Æthelflæd's teenage years and marriage. By the time Æthelflæd entered her teenage years, she was already being prepared for a role that would shape the future of Anglo-Saxon England. As the daughter of Alfred the Great, she grew up in an era defined by war, diplomacy, and political maneuvering. Her father had secured Wessex' survival against the Vikings and was now turning his focus towards strengthening alliances with neighboring Mercia. Given the importance of Wessex-Mercian relations, Æthelflæd's marriage was not a matter of personal choice, but a crucial part of her father's strategy to unite the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms against the Norse threat. Around 880, 86 or 887, likely in her mid to late teens, Æthelflæd was married to Æthelred, Lord of the Mercians. While he is often referred to as a king, he ruled Mercia as a subordinate ally to Alfred, likely acknowledging Wessex dominance in return for military and political support. Their union cemented the alliance between Wessex and Mercia, ensuring that the two kingdoms would act as a united front against the Vikings. A political union or a marriage of love? There are no surviving records that detail Æthelflæd's personal feelings toward her husband. Marriages among the nobility in Anglo-Saxon England were almost always political, and love was secondary to duty. That being said, Æthelflæd and Æthelred appear to have shared a mutual respect and worked together effectively in governance and military affairs. Unlike many royal women of her time, Æthelflæd was not relegated to the background, but took an active role in Mercian leadership alongside her husband. Some historical sources suggest that Æthelred suffered from illness later in his life, which may have given Æthelflæd more responsibility in managing Mercian affairs, even before his death. Her increasing role in governance suggests that she was not simply a passive consort, but an intelligent and capable ruler in her own right. Signs of leadership. Before Æthelred's death, even while her husband was alive, Æthelflæd showed strong leadership abilities, particularly in military affairs and administration. By the early 900s, she was already taking part in planning the defense of Mercia. Under her influence, Mercia undertook a series of fortifications, continuing her father's strategy of building burhs, fortified towns, to defend against Viking incursions. These burhs, strategically placed along rivers and roads, were key to resisting further Norse expansion into Anglo-Saxon lands. There are indications that she played a role in diplomacy as well, maintaining good relations with her brother Edward the Elder, who had succeeded their father as King of Wessex in 899. Their cooperation would later prove essential in the fight against the Norse settlers in England. How was Æthelflæd described during this period? Unfortunately, there are few surviving descriptions of Æthelflæd's appearance or personality during her younger years. Unlike later medieval queens, Anglo-Saxon women were rarely described in personal detail. However, later chroniclers praised her as a wise and formidable leader. One of the few contemporary sources, the Mercian Register, refers to her as the Lady of the Mercians, rather than a mere consort, suggesting that she was already seen as a ruler in her own right, even before Æthelred's death. Later medieval writers, such as William of Malmesbury, would describe her as a woman of boundless prudence, emphasizing her intelligence, strategic mind, and strong leadership. While these sources were written after her time, they reflect the legacy she left behind. During her teenage years and early marriage, Æthelflæd was already demonstrating the qualities of a great leader. Her marriage to Æthelred was a political necessity, but she did not merely play a supporting role. She actively participated in Mercian governance, military planning, and diplomacy. By the time her husband's health declined, she was effectively ruling in his place, setting the stage for her rise as one of the most powerful women in early medieval England. Æthelflæd and Æthelred had one known child, a daughter named Ælfwine, who was born around c. 888. Unlike her mother, Ælfwine's life is not as well documented, but she played a significant role in Mercia's political landscape, especially following her mother's death. Ælfwine was raised in a world dominated by war and political alliances, and as the daughter of the Lady of the Mercians, she likely received an education befitting a noblewoman of her time. While there are no detailed records of her upbringing, it is probable that she was trained in governance, diplomacy, and perhaps even military strategy, given her mother's active role in Mercian defense. She would have been well versed in the responsibilities of rulership and the necessity of maintaining alliances, particularly with her uncle, King Edward the Elder of Wessex. Despite her noble status, Ælfwin's life was not one of unquestioned power. After Æthelflæd's death in 918, Ælfwin was briefly recognized as the ruler of Mercia, but her reign was short-lived. By December of that same year, her uncle Edward deposed her and took direct control of Mercia, effectively ending its independence as a separate kingdom. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records this event, stating, "The daughter of Æthelred, lord of the Mercians, was deprived of all authority and led into Wessex." This suggests that Ælfwin was either unwilling or unable to resist Edward's claim, and her fate afterward remains uncertain. Some historians speculate that she may have been sent to a convent, a common fate for noblewomen who were removed from power. There are no known descriptions of Ælfwin's physical appearance or personality, and unlike her mother, she did not leave a lasting impact on history. However, the brief recognition of her authority suggests that she may have been seen as a capable ruler, at least in the eyes of the Mercian nobility. Her deposition marked the final absorption of Mercia into Wessex, a significant moment in the eventual unification of England under Edward and his descendants. Æthelflæd's leadership was defined by her strategic brilliance, her ability to command loyalty, and her unwavering commitment to defending and expanding Mercian power. She was not only a political ruler but also an exceptional military leader, directing campaigns against the Vikings and fortifying key strategic locations to secure her realm. Her leadership style combined the use of fortified towns, bursts, calculated military offensives, and diplomatic alliances, ensuring that Mercia remained a powerful force during a time of great instability. Her military strategy largely followed the precedent set by her father, Alfred the Great, who had relied on a network of fortified bursts to counter Viking raids. Æthelflæd continued and expanded this strategy, constructing and strengthening defensive strongholds throughout Mercia. Between 910 and 918, she oversaw the construction of numerous burghs, including those at Bridgenorth, Tamworth, Stafford, Warwick, and Runcorn. These fortifications were designed not only to defend against Viking incursions, but also to provide secure bases from which to launch counter-offensives. One of the earliest recorded instances of her military prowess occurred in 910, when a coalition of Mercian and West Saxon forces, likely under the command of Æthelflæd and her brother Edward the Elder, decisively defeated a Viking army at the Battle of Tettenhall. This battle, fought against the Northumbrian Danes, saw a major Viking defeat, with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle stating that many thousands of them fell, including several Norse kings. The victory significantly weakened Viking control in the Midlands and set the stage for further Anglo-Saxon advances. In 916, Æthelflæd launched a campaign into Wales, targeting the kingdom of Brycheiniog in retribution for the murder of an important Mercian abbot. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, her forces stormed a Welsh stronghold, capturing the wife of the local king. This swift and brutal action demonstrated her ability to respond decisively to threats and maintain authority over Mercia's western borders. By 917, Æthelflæd had begun an aggressive offensive against Viking-held territories in the Midlands and the Danelaw. She led her forces in a campaign that saw the submission of Derby in 917, one of the key fortified Viking settlements known as the Five Boroughs of the Danelaw, the others being Leicester, Lincoln, Stamford, and Nottingham. The capture of Derby was a significant victory, marking the first of these strongholds to fall back under Anglo-Saxon control. The Mercian Register, an annal detailing her reign, recorded this victory and highlighted the personal sacrifice made by her warriors, noting that 4 of her thanes who were most dear to her were slain within the gates. Her successes continued into 918, when she led the Mercian forces in the capture of Leicester, another of the 5 boroughs. The town submitted without a fight, demonstrating her ability to command respect and negotiate surrenders through both military pressure and diplomacy. Later that year, the Danes of York, recognizing her strength, offered their submission to Æthelflæd. This was an extraordinary event, as it marked the first time that the Norse rulers of a major Viking stronghold voluntarily acknowledged an Anglo-Saxon leader. However, before she could take full control of York, she died on the 12th June 918 in Tamworth. Æthelflæd's military success was not just a result of brute force, but of careful planning and strategic fortification. She was a master at consolidating power, using both diplomacy and warfare to expand Mercian influence. The medieval chronicler William of Malmesbury later praised her as a woman of boundless prudence, highlighting her intelligence and skill as a ruler. Her legacy as a military commander and stateswoman ensured that Mercia remained a formidable force, even after her death. The exact cause of Æthelflæd's death on the 12th June 918 is unknown, as historical sources do not provide specific details. Given that she was actively leading military campaigns and ruling Mercia until shortly before her death, it is unlikely that she succumbed to injuries from battle. Most historians believe she died of illness, possibly from a prolonged condition or a sudden disease. Some speculate that she may have suffered from a plague, infection, or complications related to stress and exhaustion from years of leadership and warfare. Chronic illnesses such as tuberculosis or other ailments common in the early medieval period could also have been responsible. There are no records indicating a violent or unnatural death, which suggests that her passing was due to natural causes rather than assassination or conflict. Her death occurred in Tamworth, one of her key strongholds and the symbolic heart of Mercia. After her passing, she was buried in St. Oswald's Priory in Gloucester, a site she had helped establish, alongside her husband, Æthelred, Lord of the Mercians. Her passing marked the end of an era for Mercia, and within months, her daughter, Alfred, was removed from power by King Edward the Elder, fully absorbing Mercia into Wessex's rule. Æthelflæd's mark on history was profound, as she was one of the most remarkable female rulers of early medieval England. Her leadership, military strategy, and governance left a lasting legacy that extended beyond her lifetime, shaping the future of Mercia and the eventual unification of England. She was remembered not only for her strength in battle, but also for her intelligence, diplomacy, and ability to command the loyalty of her people. In a time when female rulers were rare, in the years following her death, Æthelflæd's accomplishments were celebrated in both Anglo-Saxon and later medieval chronicles. The Mercian Register, a set of annals documenting her reign, emphasized her victories over the Vikings and her role in reclaiming Mercian territory. The chronicler William of Malmesbury, writing in the 12th century, praised her wisdom and leadership, stating, "A woman of boundless prudence, a singular example of virtue, the delight of her subjects, the dread of her enemies, a woman who, though a widow, was a leader of armies and a protector of her kingdom." Æthelflæd was also commemorated for her role in fortifying Mercia, as she oversaw the construction and strengthening of numerous burhs, fortified towns, securing the region from Viking invasions. Her ability to maintain Mercian independence while working alongside her brother, King Edward the Elder, was a crucial step in the eventual unification of England. Some sources even suggest that she may have had ambitions to rule beyond Mercia, as the Danes of York voluntarily submitted to her authority shortly before her death. Her influence extended far beyond her lifetime. Later medieval writers, including those who contributed to the Anglo-Norman Chronicle, highlighted her as an exceptional ruler who defied expectations. In the modern era, historians recognize her as one of the most powerful women in early English history, often comparing her to other great medieval queens and military leaders. While her name may not be as widely known today as Alfred the Great, Æthelflæd's contributions to England's history remain undeniable. Her ability to lead in war, govern wisely, and secure the survival of Mercia in the face of Viking threats ensured her place as one of the most important figures of the Anglo-Saxon era. Thank you for joining us at Lilly's Viking adventure. We hope you enjoyed this venture into the historical life of Æthelflæd. If you did help us out with a like and a sub, much love to you. See you next time.